So welcome everyone to LR06, and today we'll be covering confusing conclusions. And so rather than kind of do too much explaining up front, let's just get right into it. So as promised, we're going to talk about what do you do when you don't really know what to do with a conclusion. The short answer is I tend to revert to a P versus P plus situation. So for those of you who've been following my material, that should be familiar to you, but for anyone new, and this is the first thing that you're seeing, what I'm referring to here is that usually the way simpler arguments are set up, you have a concept P in the premises versus a concept C in the conclusion. And those two obviously are different letters of the alphabet, not only that, but they represent, the letter P versus the letter C represent two very distinct concepts. And when you have an argument that does that, you know that your job as the person analyzing the argument is to find some way to bridge the connection between P and C. But what, this whole lesson is going to be about when you don't really understand how to handle C. And there's any number of ways that it can confuse you, but basically it boils down to there's something about C that you don't quite get. When you try to make a prephrase out of it, it's hard to fit in. Any number of factors can make it difficult to handle. And so when it is difficult to handle, I revert to, like I said, a P versus P plus situation where instead of looking at the concept P in the premises and a distinct concept C in the conclusion, if you actually look at the ideas and the data that the premises give you, there's probably going to be a gap between some of those premises themselves. And that gap can be quite instructive and easier to work with at times when the conclusion is giving you a little bit of trouble. And so not only do I do the P versus P plus after having reframed the argument in my mind into a P versus P plus situation, I then look at what negative space tells us about what the arguer has left out. Yeah, I just want to note here that I actually came across this issue of needing to demonstrate how I handle conclusions that confuse me on some level during a consultation with one of your fellow viewers. So just another friendly reminder, your feedback really does count. Don't be shy. If there's anything that you have questions about, either from my material or even if you feel like it's kind of unrelated and I haven't covered it yet, that's stuff that I especially want to hear about. So don't be shy. Email me, contact me, and something good can come of it, such as this video, which might help somebody else. So the question we'll be doing is from Prep Test 50, Section 4, number 19. And as always, we're just going to start by breaking it down. Just as a reminder, since you guys aren't, I'm not putting it up here on the page, this is a flaw question. So yeah, as we do, we're going to start our breakdown, and we're going to start with the premise. Premise number 1, smokers are more likely to get heart disease. Simple enough. Premise 2, smokers are also more likely to drink carbonated drinks. Also simple enough. So our conclusion, based on that, is that drinking carbonated drinks is therefore positively correlated to getting heart disease. And so dealing with this conclusion is where my problems began when I was trying to then assess this argument for finding the assumption/flaw in it. So yeah, I had the reaction. So what was the source of my disgust there? Initially, the words positive correlation between drinks and disease stood out to me as the new foreign concept, so it would be like the concept C of the conclusion. That was introduced in the conclusion that really isn't addressed in the premises. So at first glance I thought, well, maybe this argument is going to be simpler than I was anticipating. But as I tried to unpack it a little bit more, I wasn't sure exactly how to handle the term positive correlation, which to me is kind of deceptively simple. We do use the word correlation both in a sort of technical statistical way and also just as a sort of way of saying things in general speech all the time, but I was just kind of paranoid about it when it came to LR. I wasn't sure how to handle it. I didn't know what the standards were. Like some basic stuff, like what even is the definition of positive correlation, both IRL in terms of statistics and in LR. I didn't know what the standards that I needed to apply to make sure that it was being used correctly was. You might think I'm dumb for not knowing this, but I mean, if you do think that, then that means that you and I both agree on at least one thing. But really, I just wanted to share with you the truth of my experience of this question. I really didn't know how to handle that term. I couldn't really build a prephrase around it. I mean, I could literally put a sentence together that may have qualified as a prephrase of the flaw, but I just wasn't sure that I was using positive correlation in a way that was safe logically. Of course, I can't just stop there, though. So what do I do? Instead of forcing an awkward P versus C prephrase, like I kind of told you I was trying to do but failed, I instead immediately opted to frame this as a P versus P plus breakdown. I felt safe doing this reversion of from going from P versus C to P versus P plus because there were two distinctly different premises, and the positive correlation bit from the conclusion could stretch to fit the data offered in the premises, which were about correlations of various kinds, if the exam forced us to do it. So I felt basically the consequence of moving from the standard P versus C stance towards a P versus P plus stance, that does always run the risk of ignoring the conclusion when you're not supposed to ignore it in your analysis. And so not every single situation is going to yield itself to that, but because these two things happen, that I could see that if I had to, I could go back to the conclusion and find some way to reincorporate it into my analysis if I had to. That was there. Also, what else was there was that there were two very distinct premises, and that really helps a lot when it comes to making me feel safer trying the P versus P plus route instead of trying to force myself to stick with P versus C when I didn't really know how to handle the C concept. So those two factors that I just talked about, that made me feel safe about doing the P versus P plus thing. When I put those two ideas together, that really tells me that the conclusion doesn't necessarily contain a conclusion blue concept C, opposed to the premises red concept P, which in turn means that we can be dealing with a P versus P plus scenario. If I don't have to see a disconnect between the conclusion and the premises, I can find that disconnect just within the premises themselves. That's the long story short of it. And I do want to note here, feel very free to disagree with my characterization of the conclusion. And I'm actually sure that many of the press test explanations out there actually do disagree with me. That's not really what matters. So the important thing is that I found a way to reframe the argument to help me avoid dealing with a wild card in the conclusion that I didn't know how to handle. The whole point of me doing this is not to actually demonstrate this particular question. That's something that I constantly have to re-emphasize, I find. It's not really about demonstrating. I don't think there's actually anything particularly special about this question, other than the fact that this happened to be the one that I kind of came to this insight about. But this whole thing is that if you can look at what I'm doing and sort of the mental gymnastics that I do to help myself on a situation where I don't understand something, you can take that to any other question and just give it a try. Any question where you feel like you were in a similar boat, where you're looking at the conclusion, you don't really know how to fit that into a good prephrase. You can kind of see where it links up, but it's still hard for you to nail it down into actual common sense, plain English language. Anytime you're in that situation, just try the things that I'm telling you that I'm trying here. Just revert to a P versus P plus situation, do negative space. That's the whole point of all of this. Alright, so to actually now do the things that I talked about, that whole P versus P plus thing and the negative space, let's get started with the P versus P plus bit. So premise number one is going to be our honorary red color, and so that one is just going to be simply, literally, premise number one. Smoking is linked to heart disease. The P plus, the blue, I'm going to attach the premise two, which is, of course, smoking is linked to fizzy drink consumption. And now looking at this in terms of P versus P plus, I could finally gain a frame of reference for the conclusion that worked for me. While I'm still not exactly sure how to deal with the positively correlated concept, I now see that for me, a main structural feature of the conclusion is that it somehow wants to link fizzy drinks directly to heart disease. To me, it wasn't a main structure, it was actually the main structure that I felt that I could work with when it came to the conclusion. So despite our author wanting to make that direct connection from carbonated drinks directly to heart disease, our premises tell a slightly different and less direct story. P plus links fizzy drinks to smoking, and P links smoking to heart disease, but there's never really a direct connection that our author seems to crave. So if our arguer wants to conclude that fizzy drinks leads directly to heart disease, they're kind of counting on the strength of the link between fizzy drinks and smoking and the strength of the link between smoking and heart disease. They're counting on those two things to be strong enough. We can start at fizzy drinks, kind of pass through smoking, and reach heart disease directly, kind of all in one go. Kind of like how formal logic chains work. That, even though they're not really pretending to make this like formal logic, I feel like that's what they desire when it comes down to it. They want a similar effect. They want two things that are not directly linked but share like a common sort of interstitial thing. They want to be able to start at fizzy drinks and reach directly to heart disease, even though the premises never actually come out and directly connect them. It connects one end, the fizzy drink end, to smoking, and then it connects the other end, heart disease, to smoking. And so they're hoping that the connections on either side of smoking are strong enough that you can just kind of start with fizzy drinks, get all the way to heart disease, and just do it all in one go. Alright, so we've come up with this chain, but how do we get from this chain, the drinks to smoking to disease chain that the arguer wants, to an answer choice? Again, remember that this is a flaw question. How can we describe a flaw in this sort of setup? So as I just mentioned, this is a flaw question, and helpfully, it says right in the question stem that the arguer has overlooked something. And so that leads me to think that the thing that we need to do is some negative space thinking. since we are trying to prime our minds to be receptive to something the arguer didn't say. In fact, the arguer overlooking stuff is kind of the bread and butter of what negative space is good at. And because the question stem was so direct in telling us that this is what was going on, thankfully this is going to end up being a little bit simple compared to some of our other negative space situations. And this is why it's that simple. The arguer wishes quite badly that the links in the drink, smoking, disease chain are strong enough that we can just condense it down to drinks and disease in that formal logic-like fashion that I mentioned in the previous slide. Negative space, of course, is less about what the arguer has said, but what the arguer has left out. What the arguer didn't address is anything that might disrupt that chain. Shocking, I know, if you want the chain to be a good thing, it's not a big surprise that you don't really address and really embrace concepts that contradict that chain. What is actually unironically shocking, though, is that this super stupid, brain-dead assessment that I just came up with, this whole idea that the arguer wants the chain to work, so the arguer didn't spend any time talking about how the chain might not work, that really ultimately superficial and brain-dead assessment is actually enough to get you in range of the correct answer in this situation. That's the real shocker. So I've just added now our assessment of what the assumption/flaw is, which is that the arguer has failed to account for anything that might disrupt their precious drink smoking disease chain. And so with that kind of guiding our reasoning now, let's actually start assessing our answer choices. So starting right up at the beginning, A. This is very much a maybe moment for me. I could see how it worked, but I had reservations about it. So A does introduce something that would disrupt the chain, but it's too happy about it. It's really a full-on contradiction. It's saying that the links between drink, smoking, disease, it basically works the other way, something like that. It just totally flies in the face exactly what we're doing. So that did give me some pause. So I do like the chain disrupting aspect of it, but not the over enthusiasm in doing so. So my response was to just keep it on the board and move on to the next ones. So on to B. This one was also a maybe for me on first pass. It literally starts with the words something else, which really tickles my negative space senses, because that's kind of what negative space is all about. Finding that something else that the arguer has not spoken about, has not accounted for. But kind of like A, I'm really not totally sold on how far it goes with that something else. This mystery something else, the negative space factor, that B mentions, supposedly diminishes all the stuff discussed in the premises. It basically is kind of going to the extent of just basically saying everything that the arguer talked about is stupid and is pointless. And while that might work for something like a necessary assumption question, that felt a little bit too scorched earth for me, just like I kind of felt a little bit too, that A was being a little bit too giddy about contradicting the argument. So, yeah, the same thing made me not like B as well. So, again, much like A, while I do see how if we gave B the time of day, it would disrupt the chain, but I'm not really sure that we need to take it as far as B did. So, just like A, keeping it on the board, but moving on. When it comes to C, mercifully, this one is a little bit simpler than A and B. I just eliminated it right away on first pass. It's just bad, and if anything, it's actually a strengthener more than a flaw. Far from making the argument that chain between drinks, smoking, and disease sound bad, it actually kind of puts the chain on steroids. It's saying that the links are even stronger than the arguer has presented them. D was another fairly easy elimination for me. It's not quite as openly bad as C, but in my opinion, it completely misses the chain. Even if we account for D, this whole genetic predisposition thing, there still is a positive correlation between fizzy drinks and heart disease, according to answer choice D. So I'm not interested. It doesn't break the chain so much as just kind of add a weird adjustment to it, maybe? I don't know. Either way, it doesn't really seem to, at the end of the day, if you believe that D is true, there still is a positive correlation between drinks and heart disease. And that's what our arguer wanted, and so D doesn't really sound like a characterization of the arguer's flaw. And when we get down to E, this is another maybe much like A and B, but something was a little bit different here. In a lot of ways, to me, it felt like the less evil twin of B. So where B tells us there's a third factor out there that basically just straight up bullies drinks and smoking out of the disease picture, saying that all the drinks and smoking stuff that we discussed in the premises is just not significant compared to this mystery third factor. E tells us that there's a third factor out there that brings drinks, smoking, and disease, kind of explains all of those things all at once. The net effect, if you look at E, though, logically, ultimately I feel like E is pretty much doing the same thing as B. In both of those choices, there's something else unspoken of out there that matters more than everything in the stimulus that was discussed. So to me, they're really the same thing, whether it's this third factor that is just specifically labeled as more significant, or this third factor that is more significant because it just simply explains everything. B versus E. The logical consequence, I think, is the same. So really, I find it hard to justify just picking one out of those two options. If you like one of them, you kind of have to accept the other one as well, because if you think it's correct to think that there's another factor out there that's more important, like B mentions, E is also telling us that there's another explanation that explains everything a little bit better than what was put out. And so, to me, if you have to like one, you also have to like the other at the same time. And to me, again, that is also a sign that both are incorrect, because you're not allowed to pick both of these. So I'm eliminating both B and E at this stage. As it turns out, it actually was A. And so thankfully, I managed to get to that point just by sort of the weird B and E simultaneous elimination. But the path there was a little bit rocky and a little less direct than I like. And a lot of that was due to this idea. Just looking at A as it's written, it really doesn't match what I've been conditioned to see as a proper LR response. And it's not like I matched it. It's not like it matched any prephrasing, which I really didn't bother to do anyways. Because negative space, again, it's not about prephrasing. It's just about kind of cluing your mind into what data points actually matter. So despite the inferiority of A on the surface, the combination of a P versus P plus approach and some negative space thinking allowed me to see the very, very simple concept that the arguer very much likes their drinks smoking disease chain, and they clearly failed to mention anything that could possibly disrupt that chain. This extremely, almost hilariously simple thought helped me pick an answer that much of my training would tell me not to pick. And again, just to round things out, I do want to remind you again about the point of all of this. If you didn't struggle with this question or answer choice at all, great. Unironically, great. Incidentally, the student who contacted me about this question was also in a better place than I was. They had managed to get it down to like A and E basically, without the same dilemma and needing to do all the P versus P plus hoops that I had to jump through. But again, the point is not that we share the same dilemmas. The point is to see how I work around my shortcomings and my challenges, and see if you can adapt it to your own different dilemmas. I also want to take a moment to re-highlight the importance and significance and helpfulness of talking to somebody, not just me, anybody that is qualified to do so. Talk to them. Get that free consultation. Anyone who takes this business seriously generally is offering such a thing these days. And I encourage you to do this because speaking with learners live is the best way to figure out how we as tutors can actually help you. Everything pre-recorded, my material included, is just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it sticks somewhere for somebody. Again, to talk about the particular viewer, your fellow viewer, contacted me about today's material here. They had asked about 4 different questions, and I was emailing them a response to the first of those 4 questions. And it turned into a massive wall of text. And while I was confident that what I was telling them was correct and accurate, I wasn't actually sure that this was going to help them. And so I sent that one review out, and then I said, hey, that was a pretty big wall of text. I'm not sure that this is the best way to do it. Would you like to have a free live consultation? They took me up on that offer, and I was really, really glad that they did, because it turns out that they actually had a different set of issues other than the ones that I was trying to address. And that's a very common thing to happen with anything pre-recorded, anything written. So anything that is basically not live runs a very high risk of being that kind of solution looking for a problem, in a sense. It is a solution, but it's not really the solution to the problem that this person actually had. So not only may you not be getting the specific help that you need, sometimes when something is, I think, good or insightful enough, a discussion is fruitful enough, it turns into another video that I would say this adds to the quality of my catalog in the sense that I think it hones into the P versus P plus and the negative space idea in a much simpler fashion than I've presented it so far, because I've had to do it in the context of more difficult questions. And I think that overall, all of you out there can benefit more from this. And so not only does contacting me help you, it also helps your fellow viewers. And we've reached the point, as always, where I thank you for being here and encourage you to like and subscribe. According to the metrics, like basically 70% of you guys looking at this are unsubscribed. I'm not trying to get monetized, so that's not a thing. So I don't need several thousands of you to do that. But I'm doing this to help myself and to help all of you guys. And so nobody is helped if nobody sees this. So at first I thought 40 subs or 45 or whatever I'm at now. hardly anybody's seeing this. But then you look at the metrics, and it's like thousands of you have seen this already, have seen this stuff. So I want even more thousands of people to get their eyeballs on this. And you doing these very simple things, liking, subscribing, helps the algorithm help me get to more people. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.